the origin of laws. Now, I can say very much about the origin of laws, and I realize that there are many interacting variables that shape the laws, but I'm going to compress it into the essence of the establishment of laws. It appears that years ago, in order to manage tribes and small communities, it was very difficult to manage people unless they invented laws. Now, the tribe leader always got the best of the deal as a rule. And in order to assure that be perpetuated, laws were invented. Laws originate only because of scarcity. If you have difficulty making that connection, imagine fruit growing all over the world on every tree. There would be no laws as to how much fruit you can eat if it grew all over the place. Only when food is scarce does laws come in. Not only food, but when anything is scarce, man makes laws as to who gets what. And naturally, the control group of any society gets the best. And that's the way the law is set. If we run out of material, laws are arranged so that some people get so much and others get so much, and by the amount of work you do, you get so much or so much less. But remember this, as essence, a way of thinking about law is think in terms of scarcity. If most of the airplanes disappeared, for whatever reasons, hurricane storms, then the few planes that did exist would be used by the establishment, the key rulers of the establishment. Do you understand that? If thousands of planes exist, thousands of cars, there's no need to make laws regarding who uses cars. But you can make laws about cars. On the highway, the speeds, all that sort of thing. That's to maintain a degree of control. But the best way to maintain control is through technology, so that you make cars that can't hit one another and can't exceed the speed as established in the given district. And rather than having the speed rate indicated on the highway, the power output for cars will be a certain range, instead of saying, do not drive over 60 miles an hour, or the speed limit is 60 miles an hour. The power output in that region is 60 miles an hour. And also there are other sensors that prevent cars from hitting each other. It doesn't say drive carefully. The life you take may be your own. You don't need that. You need cars. Well, can that be done? It's done in elevators. When you get in an elevator, you can't excel the speed. It operates at the optimal speed for that elevator under those conditions. So let me repeat myself again and again. I can say a lot about law, but all laws are based upon availability of goods and services, or scarcity. If there's an abundance of food, if there's abundance of oxygen, no one can put a price tag on it. If there's an abundance of underground water, nobody cares how much water you use. But laws come into existence when and only when there's a scarcity. Do you understand that? You cannot maintain laws with abundance. So when people say, well, what are the new laws in the Venus Project? Well, to the degree that we can solve problems, produce an abundance, there's hardly any need for laws. If we can raise children to behave in the most appropriate way under those conditions, you don't need laws. If the sun shines every day, I know that in Sweden, which the sun doesn't shine every day, it's not out every day. When the sun comes out, everybody comes out in the street and sits with their face toward the sun because it's scarce. So if you still have difficulty with that, the price of a house is based on the amount of energy or people employed and the materials used to construct that house. If the materials were just abundant all over the place, there wouldn't be much material cost for the house. And the rarer the materials, the higher the cost. Gold is expensive, remember, only because it's rare and it doesn't rot or rust or disintegrate. I said this before, I'll say it again so you'll understand. If it rained gold for 3 days, people would collect it, fill all their drawers, the attic, the cellar with gold. But if it continued to rain gold for months, they would sweep it out of the house. And there'd be no laws regarding how much gold you have. Do you understand that? That's the origin of laws. It has nothing to do with decency and ethics. It has to do with distribution of scarce resources. So if you ask me, will there be laws? There's no laws regarding the amount of breaths you take. There are laws against smoking in a submarine if it's trapped on the bottom of the sea and can't operate. If you light a cigar at that time, the whole gang will come at you and say, no smoking, because of the conditions. You think man makes laws to make life better for people? No, it's to manage scarcity. So if we move toward the production of an abundance, the amount of laws will diminish, directly proportionate to how much we eliminate scarcity. People think man makes laws so that life will be better for people. Not necessarily. Sometimes it's better for the control group or the selected few rather than the majority. Majority of people were not allowed to vote if they didn't own property in the old days. Only people that owned property. Women were recently given the right to vote. But what does that really mean? It means that the values they vote for have been pre-existing. The values that you give people about who to vote for are pre-existing. People don't know who to vote for or what to vote for. They vote for a person that looks like he might make a good president. But they don't know that. They have no way of knowing those things, so they vote. And it seems like it's democratic and lawful and correct, but it is not. I would say that Hitler never led Germany into the Nazi culture. I would say the Germans were preconditioned to accept those values. Otherwise, if he got up and spoke about things like he spoke about in Sweden, he'd never make it. Because the Swedish people are conditioned differently. And what they would vote for is different. All of the ideas are based on scarcity. Just how much freedom you have. If building materials for aircraft are abundantly available all over the world, the price of aircraft would be lower. And if it was rare, only dignitaries will fly. I hope you understand that. Of course, I can go into all kinds of ramifications of law and order, but they're all based on scarcity. So if you wish to think about laws, think about scarcity and its effect upon laws. Maybe another example is what happened to love when people get a divorce. The wife might say, I want the house, the car, and the kids, and the bank account. So is love a constant? Of course not. Love depends on many situations. Where is the love when the wife says, I want the house, the car, and the kids? She doesn't say, I'd like to split it equally, or rarely does she say that. So what happened to love? Love is also a product of scarcity. Very few people have a life full of love. In fact, it's an ideal people hope for. Now, you can't really have love if you have to appeal to your husband to get a new car or a new dress or a new interior or furnishings. But if you have your own purchasing power, if you have purchasing power whereby you can access anything you want, you don't have to appeal to anybody anymore. So should we appeal to people? Of course not. In a free society, you shouldn't have to appeal to anybody. You shouldn't have to walk over to your husband and say, my car isn't operating well. I've had the same car for 5 years, honey. How about a new car? He says, well, let me think about it. That puts him down when he says that on your list. You say, when do you want the car? We'll go out this afternoon and get it. If he's loaded, he can do that easily. If he's not, he says, I'm unable to do that. She says, well, let me use your car. So I need it to get to work. In other words, you don't have limitless choice. So laws are made, again. What do you want to know about law?
Relating to scarcity, like if you're in a vehicle today and you go 90 miles an hour, that's a different form of law and order of controlling somebody.
Well, they don't know how to control the speed of cars, so they put up a sign. But if technically they can design cars to travel at the appropriate speed and ride a magnetic inlay in the highway or some other laser beam, then you wouldn't need any law.
Do you feel we should work on, instead of working on something with sensors, work on the individual itself to why is it that they want to press on the gas pedal and go 95?
No, we'll do the cars just like the elevators. We won't leave it up to we won't leave anything up to individuals that can hurt other people.
Well, how about domestic relationships? If somebody isn't willing to share the loved one with somebody else and they get irritated, they become violent in the house.
Well, children are brought up a certain way in schools in the future that will accommodate that problem. In other words, you can be brought up not to want to hurt anyone or to hate anyone that isn't of your religion or your viewpoint. But when you bring up kids in school and you show them there are many different ways of looking at the world and many different people have different interpretations, if they understand that, that's exactly what an anthropologist is supposed to do. He's supposed to find out the values of a different culture. So he writes in his book, in this land people do this, in this land they do that, and the kid understands that that culture invades the value system of people to make them conform to that culture, otherwise very difficult to manage. Then they design punishments to get you to conform to the law. But if you can meet human needs, most human needs, you don't need as many laws. You only need laws during periods of disaster, shortages, things of that sort. And law enforcement will be definitely used if a meteor hits the earth and destroys a lot of the vegetation. Then vegetation will be allocated in quantities, different quantities for different people. But the distribution center, they will have to devise equipment on you. When you walk over and say, I need 5 boxes of ham or 10 boxes of vegetables, it'll scan you and know that you already got it. Do you understand that? Instead of making a law, there are very few people that try to fly jumping out of windows unless they're on drugs. You know what I mean? I think that when you bring up children, they won't try to swim to England. They know that it's far away, and they don't. Most people don't attempt that. Only when a person is on drugs or brain damage will they try to swim to England. Well, most people don't try that. But I see schools that really educate people in terms of the environment. They don't try to twist their wrist and get them to be obedient. They say these people want to be alone. But until they're educated to accept all people and judge each person on the basis of individual merit, which I think is very easy to inculcate in people, to judge them on the basis of individual merit. If only Swedes existed, there will be Swedes that find fault with other Swedes, depending on your orientation. And there are Jews that find fault with Jews. I read recently of Jewish aviators in Israel that have dropped their bombs at sea because they didn't want to drop it on the Palestinians. Of course, if they're caught doing that, they go to jail. But there are many people that learned how to express themselves without making it public if it's dangerous. It's the law in Israel. When you're given bombs, you use them to destroy the enemy. In the United States, if a guy waits his machine gun bullets up in the air, and if they catch him doing that, he may go to jail. He's broken the law. What law? The law of killing people. Well, he himself feels that he doesn't want to do that, but the government cannot afford to give him a gun and let him do what he wants with it. If you just shoot people in the army you don't like, it's just like shooting your enemy, isn't it? But that's against the law. You might go before a firing squad if the army finds that you did that. But if you shoot a guy in the back while you're running into a battlefield, they may not detect that. I'm sure there are a lot of perfect crimes committed in the army and other places. Even if the majority of people say that he should be executed, remember that's their value system, which they picked up from their culture. Live and let live. What the hell does that mean? Well, does it mean no war? You've heard that expression, live and let live. Well, I asked religious people about mosquitoes, and they said they're made by Satan, mosquitoes, all rats and things like that, so you can kill them. They have to have an answer to those things. Otherwise people get confused. But in India, you're not supposed to kill anything. You're not supposed to kill a bug, a fly, a mosquito, because all life is sacred. And some cultures believe that people come back as rats, and they have to live out their lives. If you kill a rat, you're killing or making the karma bad for the person and yourself. And if you believe you're put on earth to suffer, if you get them very young, and every time they bang their knee, they say, boy, I'm paying off my karma. You know what I mean? So you make people accept miserable situations. I would say that was the original intent of law, to get the masses of people to accept the limitations superimposed upon them as being the result of their own misbehavior. You deserve what you get. You ever hear that? You deserve what you get. So if you can convince people that all the misery that befalls you, you're paying off your karma, well, that's not bad. You don't have to have too many policemen out there either. So you got to remember that law is a practice based on scarcity, to take care of the in-group as a rule. I noticed recently that a very important person was accused of rape, and he hired the best attorneys. Well, he also wanted to head for France right away. He wanted to get out of the country, so he couldn't be put in jail. But they stopped him. So using that example sometimes says to people, everybody is subject to justice under the law. But there are a lot of people that can afford an attorney who can look up the person that claimed he raped. And they could say, well, didn't you once claim that once before in another court? Or make her look like a cheap prostitute. You know what I mean? If you have a good enough attorney, he can take anything anybody says and twist it around. Do you understand? And if you could afford only a mediocre attorney, you might wind up 2 years in jail. If you could afford a good attorney, you might get 2 weeks probation, a month probation. So attorneys must understand by that alone they are corrupt. If you can hire a better attorney than I can, you are corrupt, so's the attorney for defending you. If he was honest, he'd say, the other attorney, you got a point there. I can't disagree with you. If attorneys were honest, right? Yeah. Well, it's very hard to take a famous person and put him in a bad light. If lots of people have learned, I hate to use the word, to love him or concerned about him. They would rather, in the Deep South, I remember, a man would get up in court and say, you're going to take a nigger's word against a white man's word? If the black man claimed he was mistreated, the white man would say, are you going to take a nigger's word against a white man's word? To the judge. If you want to be elected next year? So a lot of people figured blacks lie. They have to sustain their bigotry. And also, if you owned a grocery store and you fought for the underhanded, you fought for the underprivileged, people may not go to your drugstore if it's a racial community. If you took care of a black man and say, I think he's telling the truth, and the majority disagree with you, they will boycott your store. Do you understand that? That's why conformity is almost forced. Does that make sense? Conformity is forced because they can take away your livelihood, put you in jail, build up Trump charges against you. It's very hard to sell German war bonds in America during the war. Almost impossible. In fact, you'd be picked up sooner or later if you even tried it. When I say that people cannot communicate with each other, I'm referring to the fact that if 10 Afro-Americans went to a Klan meeting to try to give them their point of view, they could not convince them. If the Jews went to a Nazi meeting to try to get them to understand live and let live, they would not succeed at a Nazi meeting. And no matter how well they use their language, it would not be understood in the same way. That's why I keep saying language is subject to interpretation and has a lot to do with your background and the prejudices built in. So it's very hard for man to be free. That would mean no environmental influence. Do you know anybody like that? I've never met a person that wasn't influenced. They wouldn't even be able to speak if they had no influence. They said, me don't understand language, that's all. They'd say in any language, me don't understand. But to have convictions or a set of values mean you come from a given culture or a subculture, or you've been influenced by a few people. Now, books that were written, I'm using old language, ahead of their time, did not build a big following. Even if you wrote a book on evolution, it might be a bestseller amongst scientists, but not amongst the religious right. Do you understand? And if most people go to church, it could never be a bestseller. If you believe in doing the right thing, if you've got such a concept in your head as the right thing, I don't know what the right thing means. I think a very good example of that is, I don't know how much George Bernard Shaw really understood that, but in the film that he did, his son comes back from college. He says, now that you're a college graduate son, what do you want to do with your life? He says, I want to go into politics. He said, well, you don't have any experience in life. You just got out of school. He said, I know the difference between right and wrong. He says, you know that? The thing that baffled the philosophers all through the centuries? You know that? He said, yes, then you belong in politics. There is no right or wrong. They're just different laws different nations make. It's a law to feed Christians to lions. It's a law to put a guy in jail if he tries to steal food from a supermarket without paying for it. The law upholds the institutions. It has to. If it didn't, the institutions would collapse. So Are the laws made for human welfare, human betterment? Not necessarily. Some are, some aren't. When a person is put in jail, it should be the law that he's trained and given a profession whereby he can earn a living. Any person in jail should be given a profession. And when he passes a test to carry out that profession, he's then free. He's given a chance. But if he's just put in jail for 20 years, I wouldn't say that does anything but build resentment. Or he might say, I guess I'm just a natural-born criminal, if they convince him of that, which they do. In court of law, they do say, you're a criminal, you've been in jail ever since you were a kid, you've been in juvenile hall, then later on you went back to juvenile hall, then you spent 3 years in state penitentiary, you're a goddamn incurable criminal. That's the decisions that people come to. To me, there are no criminals except the government would be criminal, and the military would be accused of being assassins. But I would send them back to school so they wouldn't want to kill anybody anymore. But I wouldn't kill them. That's a question somebody once put to me. If somebody murdered your daughter and cut her up into pieces, what would you do then? I would try to help them in whatever way I can, because I see them as being victims of culture. Now, I don't always go into all the detail that makes a person that way, but there are kids that beat up kids that don't agree with them, and so they put an end to that disagreement. Or if a person behaves differently than you do, he's kicked out of your club. But if you can't kick him out of your club or silence him, you might shoot him as an attempt to silence that person that makes it difficult. What do you think the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman is about? Silencing people that would attack our culture. That's what most assassinations are about. Silencing people that you disagree with. Are the assassins bad? I would say they're brought up with a different value system that upholds that person. If we uphold a certain person and put him in high political office and somebody shoots him, it means that they don't uphold that person, that they look at him differently than you do. Now your job is to turn him around, not kill him. But it's easier to kill him than to feed him for life in prison. It costs a lot of money to keep a high prison population. Anyway, I just wanted the first part of that. If you feel you can use anything, which I've said over again many times, if you feel you got a place for it, use it. Do you understand the origin of law? Or do you agree that scarcity is responsible for most laws? That's where I got that from the islands, where nobody cared how many coconuts you took off the tree. There were so many coconut trees that did not even concern themselves. And there's so many fish around here, and everybody catches fish. There's never been a scarcity of fish. I'm talking about years ago on certain islands. After the Bimini experiments, there weren't that many fish. Many anomalies and freaks in fish due to radioactive material. But the shortages of fish might be due to ocean pollution. So they make laws as to how many fish you can take on one outing. You know, they do have amounts of fish you can take, but people fish at night and they put fish in the hold, and they don't always claim that they've only gotten 200 fish. You understand? Because if they're dishonest, they get more money. That's why dishonesty, in some instances, are perpetuated, because they get more reward. I think it was B.F. Skinner that emphasized, and Watson and Pavlov, if you give people reward for whatever they do, they will repeat it. If I put $50,000 in the bank, if you assassinate a certain guy, I don't want to know how you do it or when you do it, as long as you get it done. So you can pick him off while he's crossing the street, and you can hit him. You know, there's different ways of killing people. or you can pay a waiter to put this in the guy's drink. Give a waiter $1,000. Just put this in that cup of tea. It's very easy. And finally, if they find he was poisoned, where did he drink the tea left? It's the waiter, and the waiter might say that that guy paid me to do it, and he's involved also. So there's so many different things you can do. But then there's they say there is no perfect crime. In every movie on crime, you're not allowed to let the criminal go free. Did you know that? When you make a movie, it must end justly. The guy has to be caught. But there are criminals that can't be caught. And there are people like the guy I described on Miami Beach, who owned a service station. And a guy drove in with a Rolls Royce. He said, my car isn't acting right. And he looked underneath it and just saw one loose wire. He says, it's a big job, it's going to take a week and a half. Because the guy had a Rolls Royce. The guy says, look, I need my car tomorrow. So I can put some special people on it, but it's going to cost you more. He said, do whatever you have to do, I need that car. He says, it was a big job, he just joined that one. He was telling me that story, the guy that owned the station, how smart he was. But he would be considered a criminal if he made that statement publicly. And there's no way to catch him. How do you catch a guy that tells your wife the carburetor needs to be re-cleaned and the valves need to be cleaned? Your wife doesn't know anything about a car. He says, do what you have to do. How much will it cost? He said, well, ordinarily it costs $600, but I'll make it $400 for you. He's still shafting you.
Hey, Jacque, did you see that? I think it was 60 Minutes, an investigative report where they took hidden cameras and they went into automotive repair places and then they filmed them secretly. Each mechanic gave a different
estimate,
a different appraisal of what was wrong.
Yeah.
A different bill for each person.
And they wouldn't even conduct the job.
When you're insured, an insurance company pays for your medical treatment, they put you through MRI, X-ray, everything they can to lap it up. So your bill is $3,000 for 1 day in the hospital. A day in the hospital is more than any hotel, you know. So are hospitals corrupt? Everything this system touches tends to be corrupt because it rewards deceptive behavior. That's why it's corrupt. If every time a person became corrupt, bingo, a light would go on and tell somebody, hey, that guy is corrupt. You know, corruption can work only if you get reinforced for it. But it's very hard for a person to be corrupt in the Navy. A guy working on an aircraft carrier, he can't sabotage airplanes easily because there's so many sailors all trained to serve a given function. If a plane crash lands, there's a group with fire extinguishers ready. If the guy is flying too low, there's a guy with a flag that tells him to come in again and circle and come in higher. Everybody on an aircraft carrier, as far as I know, is there for a given function. But in the world you live in today, it's not that way. And they don't have much corruption on an aircraft carrier. I don't say they don't have any corruption. They do have some corruption, but not as much. And any managed system like aircraft carrier or a war tank or a bomber with a flight engineer who tells the pilot or sets the airplane heading and the pilot can't do that, then there's a guy in the back of the plane, the tail gunner. Then there's a guy under the pilot, a front gunner. And if a pilot is not nice to the front gunner, you know, your life is threatened. Do you know what I mean? You have to be nice to everybody in that airplane. Do you understand what I mean? Your existence depends on that. But if it doesn't depend on that, you can dispense with certain people. So if we can make the world interdependent and show the extensionality of all nations, which is never done in school, I think it would be difficult to want to kill another person if you know what that means. That's what I wanted to say about law. Do you understand that? I think you can take it from there. If they don't get it, have them write us.
You got a touch of laryngitis, Jacque.
Yes, that's it.